To order. First on the agenda is additions or deletions. I do have an addition, which is we are replacing one member. So we'll add that, I guess, after the approval of the minutes. Any objections to that addition? Seeing head shake no. All right. Next order of business is to approve our February 3rd minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, moved by Jason, seconded. I think that was also by Dominica. So, Rob, you're off the hook on this one. Any discussion, additions, or corrections? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, say nay, or raise a hand. The ayes have it. So, for those who have not been aware, Chief Cambridge is no longer chief in Heinsberg. It looked like he was going to be taking a job in Richmond, but that has ceased, absent his participation since I think roughly September or thereabouts. And it seems that he is just no longer in Vermont law enforcement at the moment. I had a discussion with Chief Stallnaker, who's president of the Chiefs Association, and with Director Burkell. The Chiefs have nominated Whit Montgomery, who's the chief of Killington PD. He's also this is somewhat background information, but he's also one of the candidates who is in the level 2E to 3 pipeline. So he comes with a unique skill set and experience in terms of a pilot program that is currently operating and is relevant to the work that we're doing here. We don't have to vote on the new member because members of committees are appointed by the director. So, Director, do you have any comments, words, or official decrees?
I don't, other than it's nice to see a quorum, and I hope that we can start moving forward so we still have a lot of work to do. So, and I agree with you. I think Whit's going to be a good addition because he's midstream in that process of going from level 2E to level 3. So he will bring a good perspective.
Great. So we'll have to work on connecting with Whit, and we'll figure that out from here. I thought we had his email, but it might not be the case. So next up will be update on curriculum development. I've spoken with Sheriff Poulin, who is working on the traffic control portion of the curriculum, and he should be sending over objectives to the academy, so probably Ken, I assume, for that program. I know I've sent over learning objectives for the superload work. Rob, before the meeting started, mentioned that he's working with Ken on formatting for the judicial security work. What am I missing?
I think it's mostly that, Mark, is the development of what that level 1 looks like. And from our perspective, is the majority of it is really making sure that we have folks schedule-wise that can deliver the additional training for the level 2 week.
So let's see, courtroom security, escorts, traffic controls. So report writing and prisoner transports are the remaining 2 that I don't think we have anyone on the hook for right now. And I say report writing, that might be out of the box, ready to go because we took it out of phase 1. So I think prisoner transports is the only thing. Chris, I know I sent over the learning objectives and there's one other piece of it. Competencies? Does that sound right?
I believe so. Yes, it was like an outline form. Yes.
Should I be expecting feedback, or should anyone else working on these types of things be expecting feedback from someone before we press?
I thought, am I mistaken, did you get feedback from Ken on that As in that was like in outline form, but not the actual curriculum?
It was outline form, not the actual curriculum. I do not recall seeing it. It's not to say he did not send it. I just don't recall seeing it. So is it safe to say anyone who has not had feedback from Ken should contact Ken?
That would be a fair assessment, yes.
Okay. So then aside from that, are there any updates? Rob, do you want to talk about where you're at with the courtroom security aspect?
Yeah, we have the curriculum pretty much developed. It's just a question of turning it into what's looking to be a 16-hour part of the week, as I understand it, and talking with you, Mark. So we just need, literally, it's about formatting to a process that matches what the academy's doing, and I've got a lot of good information from Ken, so we're literally just at this point rearranging information. So I should have something to him at least probably in the next week or two.
Okay. Chris, I do pose a question with regard to the development of the curriculum. I know that we don't want to start the car and drive it away before we have everything done. That makes sense. But these are phase 2 requirements, which also makes me think that we don't have to have a absolute solid deadline of June if we have reasonable work product before June. That's my opinion. Do you disagree?
Well, yes, in some respects. So I have been talking not only here and at the council meeting, but in the legislature, that this looks more like it's going to be a 2026 offering because of the lack of this group having been able to meet and some of the information that we're still waiting for, and then aligning instructors. And also, we're going to start aligning some of the current council rules that are already in place and have been relative to PT requirements for level 2, and entrance testing, which will be coming back on board hopefully before or very close to the end of this month. So I think the June, July timeframe that we were hoping to roll this out is going to be not attainable, simply because we're going to have to align those instructors and then making sure that we can deliver that in a timeframe that makes sense for everybody here. So while I'm happy to hear different from Domenica, I know, once we identify things, like that's a problem that we want to address as quickly as we can. But the reality is we're not going to push out something that we don't have the ability to actually deliver without doing it the right way.
Domenica, if you choose to respond, or anyone else?
I second what Chris is saying. I mean, we want to make sure that we can do what we say we're doing, and that we have the resources to do that. Because I think that's been part of the frustration, and a lot of initiatives and things that have gone on are these, I would say, unfunded mandates, but you know what I mean, in those spaces where the expectation is to do something and the resources just can't meet it. So I do think it's probably a more measured approach to do it this way.
Anybody else?
I think, Mark, just so that we don't get also lost in the weeds, like we want to deliver a package of knowing that this is ready for everybody. The curriculum that we're waiting for and developing and making sure that we have the valid learning objectives and that we have the ability to test it, all of those things that we're waiting for are really around the level 1 training. And they're also in the portion of required core classes. So they're not actually being delivered in those first 3 weeks or the first 2 weeks of the level 1. So you do have that additional time to kind of play around with in there, because if we deliver this as a package beginning in 2026, then once those first 2 weeks for level one are built out, then you still have that time for them to be coming back within the next year of those core classes that you're going to be asking them to receive training in. So it's not like, January 1 of 2026, you have to be worried about that, but we want to make sure that that curriculum is done and developed and ready to go at the beginning of the year.
Makes sense to me.
I think
Anyone else? Oh, go
the
ahead, Chris.
important piece for me is to have and so for instance, like what I'm hearing from Rob is that, probably a week or two, he's going to have that pretty much put together and sent to Ken, is that we then share that within, this group to take a look at it and see, does this meet what we're trying to do? Are we meeting the learning objectives? I don't know if what Rob is going to put out, which I believe probably will, but have what testing looks like for those learning objectives. I'm assuming that they do that already within what they train in the judiciary. So, and again, Mark, I don't know if it was Sheriff Poulin you were reaching out to, or whether it was you yourself, that there was one sheriff's agency that had a lot of, traffic management, traffic control, that type of stuff that already had that was developed. I don't know if it was through NHTSA or not, but all of that material should have those testing objectives. So I just want to make sure that everybody in this committee is, on the same page and has a chance to look at those.
Yeah, it was the Washington County Sheriff who is currently certified. I believe it's FHWA. I always confuse the different delineations of NHTSA and Department of Transportation at the federal level, but there's a federal program that has a certification for flagging, which is nuanced but slightly different than traffic control under Vermont law, but they've moved it to be a Vermont-based training curriculum. So he is working on that, and Ken should be expecting that work from Sheriff Poulin. Oh, don't want to close my screen. Anyone have questions on the status of curriculums? Any questions on things they should be doing next? Jason, I assume your curriculum's ready to go for our phase 2 program. We just need to do it.
It is, yes.
Do those curricula have to be sent to TAC for review or approved somewhere aside from Ken, Chris?
They don't, but I would like it to go through TAC so that they, I would like TAC to be the group that is taking a look at all curricula that we put through the council before it gets to the council. They're kind of the catalyst for this work happening finally, and I think that it's good to keep them on board and make sure that, like, Jason being a part of this is really helpful to us, so we know the direction it'll be going in. But it would be nice for a group of folks to take a look at it before we make a recommendation.
So good steps to recommend for anyone writing curricula or curriculi would be get objectives and competencies to Ken for an initial review. From there, develop draft to send to Ken for another review and then send to TAC.
Yeah, I think once we get it ready and we know that it's ready for a final review, then we'll send it to the TAC. And I think all those questions will likely have been vetted out by this group before it gets there, especially with Jason being a part of it. But just follows a nice flow of process of a committee that's already been set up and in existence and doing work that we would just like to follow.
And then I know with the instructor certification process, there's 2 tracks. One is for already approved courses versus ones for instructor certifications for curricula put together by an instructor. I assume we're following that second track.
We are. We're also, we also have, I should know the date, I'm sorry, but we have an instructor development courses upcoming here very soon that will be available to folks that either want to have their own initial instructor development for their own agency, or if they want to be a council-approved instructor to start that process that way as well.
And if a person's already an instructor for the council, is that a requirement?
No,
All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
the only comment I would just make, and it's just in the interest of everybody's time, is that would it make sense to schedule your next meeting for 2 weeks out, just because that's what Rob seems to be looking at more as a time frame? And I don't know if that's, I mean, Jason's material, like you said, is already done. But I don't know if that's something, Jason, you want to share maybe with this committee, just so that they can take a look at it as well.
I will. It hasn't been updated, but this is a good reason to go through, look at it. And because, for example, that particular course has no testing. It is right now, its current form is 4 hours of lecture because there's no time. Because
Yep.
the nature of that class is writing and then getting feedback, but you're only there for 4 hours. So there's, with the level 3, we give them homework, because we're coming back. So this, in order to test for competency in this one, that may require some new ways of thinking.
We can have further discussion about that too, with you and I and Ken.
There might be opportunities also, Jason, to look at the scope of practice of a level 1 and find work product that they would likely be involved in. Just, I mean, pulling apart the areas that are part of phase 2. Courtroom security, Rob already has reports that are done for situational things, right, Rob?
Yep.
So there could be opportunity to say, hey, generate these things based off this framework that the judiciary needs. Vehicle escorts, generally not a report until somebody runs over a traffic sign. But what was the company and what sign did they run over? So, I mean, a fairly low level synopsis. Traffic controllers, no report. Prisoner transports, that would all tie to phase 1 type stuff, usually around force. And so then I think we could look at phase 1, which could be basic use of force writing, which maybe the requirement for report writing comes after defensive tactics training. And so there could be some scenario-based things saying, write a use of force report for applying, I don't know, some form of force. And now they know the language, and so we could potentially tee up some of those things leading up to your creative thinking. But we might be able to structure in a way that they come in with the ability of existing work products so that you don't have to spend an hour class time with a person who can write 80 words a minute versus a person who hunts and pecks at 5 words a minute.
We can really, you can wrap the instruction around virtually anything. The real meat and potatoes, especially with level 2, but this goes for level 3 as well, is how to write objectively, to write, to paint the picture for the reader, and what not to say, what past tense, active voice, all those things. So that can apply to anything from the courtroom to running over a sign. It's just basic writing instruction. It's not creative writing. That's really what we spend our time doing. I mean, sure, we delve into affidavits, things like that, but it is a writing overview, so we can really mold that to any course of instruction, because professional writing is professional writing, and we teach objective fact finding and reporting.
So I pose a question, is there a writing overview that could be a webinar of sorts, one that's recorded that we could say this is a prereq to go to the in-person class, that gives the layout of this is what we expect for law enforcement writing. It's chronological. It's going to be on this and date at this time. Could we frame those structures beforehand so they at least have that introduction, so when they land in the class, then it's not news?
Uh, we certainly could, and we probably should. And that's where we may want to include basic grammar refreshers. I mean, we're spending time, not as much time as when I went through 25 years ago when we had an actual English instructor coming to speak to us, but we're talking about the importance of using paragraphs. So things like that really, especially now, are very important and could be front loaded.
And then this is completely removed from this topic, except for the fact that it has to do with report writing. I was just down at the FBI CJIS conference, and one of the new issues on the front end, cops using large language model AI to write reports, and the problems that that has. And so at least talking about that might be something of value to consider with report writing, or not report writing. But that's a leading issue that I'm sure will start to dominate discussions.
It does, and I can assure you already with the level 3 classes, it is forbidden on day 1.
All right. Anything else on this agenda item before we press on to the SWOT analysis? All right. I know it's been a while since we've looked at this. Also, hi, Ken. Welcome.
All right, sorry it's so late. We
Oh,
had
no problem.
a few quiz failures from the motor vehicle office this morning that needed some attention.
I'd hate to have your job get in the way of our work, Ken.
I would hate for my peanut butter to get in your chocolate.
I've never heard that one before, but I bet it would actually be good.
I probably should stop and think about these things before I say them. It will inevitably get me into a lot of trouble, but hey, you'll have that.
Never stopped
I'm
me
just
before.
thinking M&Ms and goldfish taste good. Why wouldn't peanut butter and M&Ms taste good? All right, is this large enough for people to see? All right, so we were focusing on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We've had certainly an amount of delay, which either gives way to brilliant thoughts or forgetfulness. We'll accept both. But we're focusing on the strengths, weaknesses of level 2 as it stands today and what we're trying to solve, and finding directions of where to go with it. We're already, in a way, on a path forward because I think some of this is obvious, but also at the same time, we might be able to nudge some of our directions. So I can go through each of these if the group wants me to, or if you had enough time, I'm happy to scroll. We prefer the latter. Looks like I have people reading, so I'm not going to scroll.
I'm good with you scrolling when people are done reviewing this.
I'm seeing head nods. I'll press a little bit further. Good to scroll.
Are we still at a point where we want to include the fitness testing under weaknesses? Where
We're
it sounds like,
calling, yeah, so we kind of had to pick, great question, Ken. We kind of had to pick a point in time that we're targeting. So we were talking apples to apples. So
sure,
this is the level 2 program, I would say ending 2024.
okay,
Because some of these, as you've identified, are already horses out of the gate eating peanut butter and chocolate. If I move too quick, please let me know. So everybody had enough time to reflect. So I'll do the first pass and say, is there anything that stood out that is poorly written, immediately offends your interest, or was captured incorrectly? All right. Anything that we've missed that you thought about? I have one, but I'll turn to others first. Hearing none. So I don't know if I've shared at least the proposal I've suggested to many of you individually, but I've long presented an idea that's based off of either education or trades education with regard to how we train people. And the law enforcement training model generally follows a trades model where we have baseline levels that are acceptable. So if we thought about an electrician, we have an apprentice level, journey level. We think about law enforcement, we have the apprentice level, which is go to the academy, you go through field training, whether that's level 2 or level 3, followed by the ability to expand your knowledge base. And so some agencies will seek various training opportunities, both at the academy as well as out of state. But basically, you have these singular gates at, or I should say milestones, that with in the law enforcement training model says you can do this much. And we treat it as an end all be all. Now, this goes back to the times before our current system where it was a part-time and full-time certification, which has been translated to our level 2, level 3 versions. The model I've proposed is basically granularized training. So in the same context with an electrician, we could have a person who has the baseline levels of electrical knowledge and safety, who's capable of working in that apprentice format with another person, but they're not trusted to do the work themselves. To the journeyman, which is they're now capable of working by themselves, but it's still going to be reviewed at higher levels. To that supervisory level that gives that broader depth of knowledge. And the way I would frame this in Vermont law enforcement is that we have a lot of specializations across the state, whether it's regulatory work through the Department of Motor Vehicles, Fish and Wildlife, liquor control, whatever. Sheriffs obviously do a lot of unique things. Patrol is its own world unto itself of training. And so I think that there would be benefit in us being capable of identifying what are the minimum requirements for the different milestones. What is a person, a member of the public who walks up to a person in uniform expecting of this person standing in front of them wearing a badge and gun? And then how do we say, okay, members of the ICAC task force need to be trained on how to handle materials related to child sexual assault material? How's evidence stored? How do we work with digital storage of forensic evidence related to those investigations? Not everybody needs that level of training, but certainly it's a valid level of training that is necessary in some way, shape, or form. Not everyone needs to have court security training, but it's a valid training for the purposes it needs to accomplish. So how are these trainings accessible? And how do we expand an officer's ability? The council's current rules allow for the council to expand an officer's scope of authority based on additional training. And Chris or Ken, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I did ask the question a few months ago. To my knowledge, nobody has had their scope of authority expanded under that rule.
Well, technically, I mean, yes, you have WIT going through it now, but technically, level 2 expands their scope of authority by getting DUI certification. It's not a course that they normally would take, but they're entitled to it. They can go up to that level because that's what everybody needs. So technically, yes.
So I'd raise that question without speaking in specifics, because my understanding is the DUI course, while would be the training that would expand a level 2 officer's scope of authority, it's never been granted. And I'm drawing a line there in saying whether it's been granted or not, because we did have it come up in an instance where level 2 was involved in a felony DUI, I think, as a professional regulation case, and that was a question that was posed on it. Am I misremembering something, Chris, in that?
No, that's not the question that was posed in it, though. The question was, did it exceed the scope of authority for that officer certification?
Do you recall the outcome of that case?
The outcome, I believe, was that, yes, that it did, because they were outside of what a level 2 authorized person can do. Now, the training was authorized, but once it got to the felony level, it was outside of the scope of practice. It
Okay.
would not have been had there been supervision by or another full-time certified officer there present when that happened.
Oh, and it also would not have been had the council expanded the scope of authority to investigate a felony DUI based on having attended the DUI school.
No, that's a statutory difference in between scope of authority. So the actual training in order to investigate that is essentially the same. The difference was the conviction of the person prior to. So that's, I hate to say that's one of those poor examples, like the investigation of that crime and somebody's scope of authority are really one and the same. Whether that person could effectively do it on their own without that supervision was a scope of authority issue.
So my recollection, and I'm happy to take a look at it though, is that the legislature empowered the council to recognize other areas where scope of authority can be expanded. In the case of that instance, it had not. So what I'm identifying as an opportunity is the council does have an authority that the legislature has given to them. We just have never exercised it, and that might be an opportunity that we can expand training once we can identify the milestones. Dominica?
I'm assuming that was a charged case. Was it a suppression issue that came up? What happened in court as a result of this exceeding authority?
Case was dismissed.
So my pause here, Chris, because I haven't heard that it was challenged statutorily that the council didn't have it. So I'm just looking for that reason because it kind of renders my opportunity moot if it is. Do you have an understanding different of my understanding that the council does have that authority? We just haven't exercised it.
I would agree that the council has the authority to go there. There hasn't been, I don't think there's been any areas that have been identified as where that scope of authority should be exceeded or an ask for that. And then I think that would be a very cautious review of what are those expectations, and does that level 2 person have the training to do what you're looking to seek that additional scope of authority for?
Yeah, so I'll just use removing that incident from the conversation because I think it's kind of immaterial, other than some people might have it in their memory if you're part of that hearing. Allowing more access to training, I think, is better for everyone. And so where I would go with this is to say, with DUI specifically, as a practitioner, I think it's stupid, my opinion, that we have a person who can attend a DUI course that enables them to investigate DUIs. And generally speaking, the limitation on the difference of a DUI misdemeanor and a DUI felony is whether a criminal record exists. It doesn't require a special skill set to look at the record other than understanding how to look at a record. And so that would be an area or an opportunity I see that the council should say, we believe a level 2 is capable of investigating a felony DUI. We want to limit the scope of authority, if you've completed that training, at fatals. I think that a level 2 does not have that skill set to investigate a DUI with death resulting. So I think there's opportunities where we can say, what are classes that would allow a level 2 to learn additional things? Domestic violence might be another area where they're currently restricted in investigating a first degree, I think it's first degree ag domestic. But again, it's the presence of, I think, an abuse prevention order, maybe an anti-sexual assault order that could elevate a misdemeanor domestic to a felony domestic. And again, that's just basic reading comprehension. So I think that's an opportunity. Would anyone agree or disagree before I add it?
I wouldn't disagree, Mark, with that premise at all. I think it's highly dependent on, the officer themselves, their experience, the agency's use of that officer based on their certification level, and or whether they just happen to come across something that, it just in the course of their being on duty that presents itself. And I don't think it's a smart idea to just put these out as a blanket. Like that's, we could do this because in some cases, absolutely makes sense. In some cases, it should give us some pause to think that we would just automatically give somebody an increase in what their level of certification is because of DUI is one of those things like makes total sense to me. Like it's the difference between a conviction. I could see that argument even with domestic assault and prior convictions with domestic assault. But I can also see where there are complicated investigations that take place that result in a felony charge. where there was no misdemeanor charge to begin with. I wouldn't want to give that false impression that that person, just because they have that level of certification, can now do those types of investigation. If that makes sense.
It does, and my lay reading of the statute basically says the council can prescribe what those things would be. And so I think that would come back to when we look at our curriculum and we say we're doing competency-based training. If we are saying as part of this course, one of the competencies that need to be demonstrated is they're capable of reading a criminal record, that would expand their scope of authority. And maybe that's a separate process. Maybe that's baked into the DUI school. I know that's a NHTSA program, so adding things to their curriculum is a little different, but no less. I think an opportunity would be for us to look at how do we, in service, continue expanding people's knowledge, as opposed to saying you have met level 2 and therefore you can go no higher, which then we've created an artificial glass ceiling.
Isn't the rebuttal to that, they can certainly go higher. They just need to come and get their certification enhanced from level 2 to level 3.
If there's, well, the rebuttal to that would then come back to the various issues that, at least in part, created this committee, either legislatively or at the council's own initiative. But there's discussion about people who can or cannot access the level 3 academy. There's discussion about the commuter academy, or whether we should go to collegiate or paramilitary. Like it opens all those discussions, which I think are valid discussions to have, Ken.
Absolutely.
But I also, when we have agencies who are using level 2 in a patrol capacity, which even with that, I find is a varying definition. We're already dealing with officers who are going to be exposed to something which they might not even know a crime's happening in front of them because they've never been trained on it. So that's not misconduct, that's ignorance. And being able to say, hey, this is a time to introduce additional training, to say, hey, this is time to call in a level 3. I think, at least in the patrol context, would help absolve some liability there when we've completely missed a crime against a family member that would fall into a felony level that dude just breezed right past, not recognizing they had it. So I'm going to figure out a way to try to sum up what I just said in a phrase.
So Mark, what you're saying is that specific training on when a level 2 should access a level 3 and then collaborate or hand off in that way? Is that?
I'm saying that we might need training to do just that, but we might also be overtaxing level 3s to do things that require things within a level 2 skill set, just because how their statute was written originally. So to the point of DUI, could the council make an assessment of, based on our curriculum, based on our competencies assessed in that program, could we say a level 2, while not statutorily entitled to investigate a felony level DUI, is capable of investigating a felony level DUI because of the third offense? My personal assessment as a professional who's done a lot of DUI work in the last 20 years, yes. It doesn't take much to see if it says 1201 convicted.
I'm
Do I
thinking
need
about
to
it.
go write that report
trial.
for the level 2 officer because they know everything about it? And I said, well, I have a higher certification. I think that's an abuse of a resource. But I understand why there is a desire for that higher level review on a felony case. There's more impact. But I also think that is absolutely a guardrail that should exist and saying this is a limitation level 2 can or cannot do.
I don't think that's oversight though, Mark. I mean, I shouldn't say part of that safeguard is having a level 3 overseeing what a level 2 is doing, right? Like, because they don't have that certification, there may not be any difference between a felony or a misdemeanor DUI if it's simply about conviction. If it's about other things, then that use of a level 3 supervising that level 2 while they're doing that is appropriate. And it's also an educational tool for the level 2 to understand those differences.
Can you give me an example?
I'm just saying, like, I don't understand that when you say that's a waste of resources to have a level 3 doing the same thing that a level 2 is doing, or at the same time.
So
Is that what you mean by that?
I'm going to use my scenario of DUI. I have an officer or deputy who stops a person. They've conducted standardized field sobriety tests. They've administered Alka-Sensor. They've taken a person into custody. They've driven back to the office or location to do the processing. An hour later, they get a copy of a criminal record that says this person's been arrested for DUI 2 times before, which would elevate this to DUI 3, which is a felony, which is outside of the scope. In that circumstance, I believe a level 2 officer based on current training, end of 2024, who's had DUI school would be capable of reviewing the criminal record and saying the difference in this investigation is that they have a criminal record. Having a level 3 provide any higher level review is just taking a resource off the street, calling someone out, doing something to address something they have zero visibility on. They were not on the traffic stop. They were not part of standardized field sobriety testing, not part of the DMT processing. And only when the record was run was it, okay, now we need you to come look at this. Which generally I think is going to happen through agency supervisory processes anyways, no less. I don't see where I need to have a level 3 look at that. Whereas on, say, a DUI death resulting, we need a death investigator. We need the state's attorney involved. We have 24-hour timelines back from the death. I think maybe even up to, in some cases, 168-hour reviews of timeline. So we're starting to add in a lot of complexities there, which would be far outside of the realm of a level 2. Often it's outside of the realm of what the level 3 basic training teaches.
I don't want to get into the weeds on this, Mark, and I completely understand what you're saying, and you make good points, especially around DUI. But let's take that same scenario and you have a level 2 officer that goes to a traffic accident, realizes that the person might be intoxicated, person's injured, they go to the hospital. That officer with his or her level of certification processes that person for a DUI, and it may be their first offense. What if that ends up being a serious injury or a death resulting from that crash? Now it becomes a felony, not the DUI, but there's an additional felony charge. It's just like, we can look at it either way. We can come up with scenarios that play to both arguments. What I just want to make sure is that people understand what their scope of authority is. And if we're going to look at increasing that we're just thoughtful and measured in what we're looking to increase the scope of authority. Because one other thing that I'll say is, while all of this is good, let's worry about the first problem. How about we start resourcing this place to develop what you want to have happen and provide the instructors that can add up these additional times and where we want to go into additional things, and the instructor capability and the timeframes in which to do all of these different things. Now, piecemealing, yeah, you can do without too much manipulation there, but those are things that, again, I would want a committee like this to really dig into the specifics here, because you can go into the weeds either way that you want to take a look at this and say, what makes sense? And are we trying to give folks an incremental step increase to get to what would benefit public by having somebody that's certified to do what they should do? Or are we looking to benefit the agency by giving somebody a little bit different, a criteria? Or are we looking to benefit a step system in which we're hoping to get to an eventual level 3 certification, which if that's the case, that will look entirely different than what you have for level 3 certification right now. So just understanding what all those measures are that you're talking about and treating them realistically, right? Not just carving out what works for some folks and not for others.
And that's why I think it's an opportunity. Well, we have 1 minute left. Anybody want to throw anything in before we open it up to public comment? All right, I'm gonna stop. Did I stop sharing my screen? I guess I did. I'm sorry. So we are scheduled to meet on the 31st. We'll get that reminder resent out. Any agenda items people would like for the next meeting? I feel like we beat up the SWOT analysis pretty good.
I would just say, Mark, if folks are able to get curriculum put together, if and sending it to Ken, if maybe we could just share it before the meeting so that folks have a chance to take a look at it and we can have productive discussion.
Yep. So what we'll focus on the next meeting is at least where we're at on current curriculum stuff. We'll leave it broadly with stuff since things are in different spots. And then we'll go to at least the draft of the report that may or may not be what we want to continue with, just based on the directions we're going. See you in 2 weeks. And that's what we'll plan on for next week's meeting or the 2-week meeting. Thank you, everyone. Is there a motion to adjourn?
We'll assume no public comment.
Dominica looks like she wants to offer a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Cool. Is there a second?
I second.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Take care.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Take care.